Mia, thanks so much for being with us. You're coming to us from Montreal, right?
Yes, thanks for programming the film.
We are very happy to do so. So, again, I have so many things that I want to talk to you about, but I guess the really obvious first question that probably everyone asks you is how you found this story in the first place. Did it start with Mutulu's story? Did you meet someone who sort of introduced you to this story?
Well, I met Mario Wexu, who's the acupuncture teacher
Oh, okay.
who taught the Black Panthers and Mutulu acupuncture, who's from Montreal. And I met his daughter through friends. His daughter's my age, and she was telling me about how her father had helped the Black Panthers and the Young Lords set up this program in the South Bronx. And I got super curious, and then I met Mario, and from there I started to write Mutulu. And that was in 2013. So that's when the seeds were first kind of planted, my curiosity.
So I didn't put two and two together, but Dr. Wexu is from Montreal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how right, okay. And so you approached, as far as the members of the Panthers and the Young Lords who obviously ran the program or started the program, you first reached out to Mutulu.
Yeah, so I wrote Mutulu a letter. He was incarcerated outside of Los Angeles, and I just wrote him a letter saying I was really interested in this story, and I told him that I knew Mario, and he hadn't heard from Mario in 30 years. So he wrote back, and then we started corresponding, and then I made plans to go visit him in person. And in the beginning, I thought it might be a film about him and Mario reuniting in 2016 when he was getting out of prison.
Yeah.
But so that was sort of what started, like just kind of as an idea that I was floating around and just trying to figure out if it was possible. And then I was going to LA a lot that time, filming Deprogrammed actually in San Diego. So
your previous film.
Yeah, so I got to know Mutulu quite a bit, learned a lot, and then Mutulu wasn't released in 2016.
Right.
So then I started to go to New York and meet other people who were involved in the Lincoln Detox, Walter Bosque particularly, and Susan Rosenberg, and then from there I started to re-pursue the film as a kind of a broader, not broader, but as a film more about the collective of people.
And the first question that we had from a viewer is Carrie Bryman, I hope I'm saying that right. She asked, how did you get access to your subjects? And that's kind of my next question for you too, which is that I'm wondering, like a lot of stories, they kind of start unraveling. So like you meet somebody, they say, oh, go talk to somebody else. And then that person says, oh, if I talk to you, this third person will be willing to talk to you. And it kind of unfolds like that. I'm kind of guessing that's how it went.
Yeah, actually, exactly. And it didn't happen overnight. It took quite a while. It was a few years of me just visiting Mutulu and Mario here. Mario became my acupuncturist in Montreal, so I'd go see him often. And then I met Mutulu's son, because Mutulu couldn't watch my previous work or really do any research on me. So his son, Moprim Shakur in LA, was able to kind of suss me out a little bit more.
Yeah, he vetted you, right?
Yeah, vetted me. And then Mutulu would put me in touch with people. And it just happened like that, basically. I would go meet people in New York, spend some time there. And then, yeah.
Go ahead.
And I was doing research interviews in the beginning and then trying to get the money to finish the film. And then, yeah.
When I first heard about your film, so I lived in San Francisco for some time and had always heard stories about how the Black Panthers, who obviously started in the Bay Area in Oakland, you know, they were, their whole, you know, sort of raison d'etre was to support and improve the lives of their community. People remember one thing, or, you know, specific things, which is their image, the rifles and the, you know, wicker chairs and all that, and their, you know, militant stances. But the thing that always stuck out for me was the breakfast program that they did. And I think in the Bronx, it would seem like a lunch program, but in Oakland, I had often heard about how they ran, they had a community center where the school kids who were kind of food insecure at the time would be able to have a good breakfast before they went to school. And so that was kind of the only like concrete evidence that I knew of that about, the good works of the Black Panthers. And so I was fascinated to hear about this one. You must have had a similar reaction, right? I mean, I can't believe that this story hasn't been told before to this extent.
In fact, I mean, that was my initial reaction when I first heard about it from Mario. I knew, like, when he described how everybody was 20, 21, 19, and how these young people came together to tackle healthcare sorry, I get a little nervous sometimes when I'm talking.
No problem.
But
so do I.
yeah, like, I think it's really like, the whole thing just really fascinated me. And I was also just surprised that I couldn't find information online. Now there's much more. If anybody watching this wants to do more research, it has been articles written and different students writing about this in the last 6-7 years. But 8 years ago, there really wasn't much. And
I don't know if it was after I heard about your film or not, but earlier this summer I read a book called Days of Rage, which was a book that came out a few years ago, which I'm sure of course you read, because a lot of these guys are in it. And it's about the sort of radical left, underground activities, starting with the Weather Underground in the late 60s and moving up. But Mutulu and Sekou are involved in, they talk about some of the things that you talk about at the end of your film.
Yeah.
So it's there, but it's, it's just sort of a piece of that pretty heavy book, and
I think that, when you do look at Mutulu Shakur and Sekou Odinga in the Black liberation movement, you're going to have just the militant side, like the kind of the history that really criminalizes their politics. But the acupuncture might pop up as it sort of, even sometimes they'll suggest that it was a cover-up, like that the acupuncture clinic was just a cover-up for this political organization, and they really dismiss the actual medical work that they were doing,
right, and which clearly had a remarkable high rate of success in curing or helping many people get rid of their addictions, set aside their addictions.
Yeah, and even more so, NADA, the 5-point ear acupuncture protocol that they developed, has been was incorporated by Dr. Michael Smith, this white doctor that was at Lincoln Detox in 1985. So after everybody had gone underground or, disappeared. So people don't understand the true history behind this.
Did you say earlier when you met Dr. Wexu that you yourself have undergone acupuncture? You use it?
Yeah, acupuncture has kind of changed my life in a way, because I have chronic migraines and stuff. And once when I was interviewing, the first time I was interviewing Mario, just about this history, and he could tell that I had a headache. Like, he was looking at me and he insisted on giving me some needles. And so he really helped me a lot.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really
to me, acupuncture is it's so beneficial. Like, there's so many things that it can treat that that normally we just take prescription drugs for. So, and that's what they understood then. Politically, they understood this.
I have a good friend who, I think he had a partial tear of his rotator cuff, and he was going to undergo surgery. And then he said, well, try acupuncture. And he swears that it cured that he didn't have to undergo surgery, because he swears that it repaired his rotator cuff. And I haven't had that problem yet, but when it's coming, I want to try acupuncture before surgery, for sure. So thanks for the another recommendation. So you mentioned, so the next question I want to ask you is one that I'm sure you also probably get asked quite often, which is that just to be blunt, you are a white woman telling what's essentially a people of color story. You know, you mentioned a little bit about winning Matulu's confidence. I mean, that probably had everything to do with you, you know, being able to go ahead and do the story, and other people becoming willing to talk to you because you kind of had his say so. But did you run into situations where people were like, why is the white lady telling the story, you know?
Not with the people involved in the movement that I was interviewing, but I asked people about this because with the collective of people were mostly Black, mostly Puerto Rican, also some white, mostly white lesbian women and other progressive,
Right.
like left-wing doctors. So they always describe it to me whenever I brought this up is like that they were at, they talk about it from that time, that period of time as everybody coming together. It's like the movement was anti-imperialist. So there was like, it was, everybody was coming together to fight a system that excluded people. But yeah, it feels weird. It feels weird. It's more of an issue today than when I started in terms of people, in terms of discussing it with people. But yeah, it's always been to me something that I felt strange about when I thought about it, but when I was doing it, not. I don't know if that makes sense.
It totally does make sense. Yep.
But it's something I'm very mindful of, and which it was very important for me to have a very collaborative editing process. So Cleo Silvers, Makini Shakur, Moprim Shakur, more than any other film I've ever done or friends of mine have done, like I had consulted people from the film and from the movement consulting on all the cuts, just to make sure the tone was right, you know?
Yeah. Another viewer is asking a question that kind of bounces off what we were just talking about. She says, the film is very apt for the present, but when did you start production? So that kind of feeds into what we were just talking about, which is, you know, the state of Black Lives Matter. And obviously the movement had already started, I think, when you started the film, but the urgency has, you know, compounded, especially this year. So the film seems even more timely now than maybe it would have when you first started it.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't think it was timely. I mean, I always thought it was timely because politics and healthcare is such a big issue. I mean, I come from Canada where we have, it's not the same thing. We have universal healthcare.
Right.
There's still, you know, there's still problems, but I mean, I think people didn't think it was relevant. Some people, when I was trying to raise money for it, but I thought it was, the urgency was Matulu's case, like Matulu still being incarcerated. So when he wasn't released in 2016, that kind of was a driving motivation to provide a counter narrative to him, to his situation, you know, like him being incarcerated and him being an elder and not being released. And so that was one part. And also the opioid addiction is
Yep.
huge, and healthcare and pharmaceutical companies and all these things, and the war on drugs, mass incarceration. I think this film really looks at a period of time when this was all beginning, because it starts in parallel with the war on drugs. And it's like they really understood. When I speak to Matulu and Mario and Walter and Susan, they all really understood what was happening back then, or how far the war on drugs would go to, you know, they didn't imagine it would end up, that mass incarceration and everything would end up as big, as out of control as it got. But
right. And I was going to ask you a little bit about the, you know, comparison between Canadian and American healthcare, which I'm not even sure there is any comparison. But, you know, there's the one point in your film where the doctor who worked in the clinic says that the methadone, the guys who were pushing methadone as a you know, recovery tool, didn't want acupuncture stepping on their toes. Did you, when you get acupuncture treatment, does your healthcare cover it?
No, actually it doesn't. So, I mean, which is I mean, it doesn't cover it, but because acupuncture, the way that it's kind of become its own industry and stuff, but when they were learning acupuncture, when Dr. Shakur was learning acupuncture, and Walter and everybody in the collective, they saw it as a way towards, like a way that they could, a tool towards self-determination. So this was a way that they could heal their communities that didn't cost that much, and that they weren't dependent on this white supremacist medical system and big pharma that was, so, you know, it's hard to really compare Canada and the conditions of Black and brown communities in the 70s and today in the US. Like it's, it's such a far stretch.
Right. Okay. So we have Tiffany. Hi, Tiffany. How are you? Tiffany wants to know if how long people were recommended to do acupuncture treatments for addiction and withdrawals. Does it become a lifelong treatment for them?
Well, when I've asked, most people I've asked, like Mario and some people that I met that have experienced it, like Juan Cortez, generally the rule is, whatever problem you had, whatever treatment you're treating, it's generally 12 sessions for every year you've been. So say you were using for 10 years.
Oh,
That's kind of a general rule, but it would be times.
So if you were addicted for 10 years, and then it would be 100, they would say you should go through 120 procedures. Yeah,
but I think what I understand, it's really about keeping a balance, because acupuncture treats the anxiety and the symptoms that lead people to addiction.
Right.
And some people really end up like Juan Cortez, who treats people at Nairi. He's been clean for 14 years and still gets acupuncture regularly.
Well, it seems like a lot of the folks benefit from continuing to do it, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also incorporating like holistic, like breathing tech. Like at the Lincoln Detox, we didn't get into it in the documentary, but they taught like breathing techniques, yoga, tai chi. So there was a lot of other kind of tools that you could adopt to or incorporate into your life to reduce
anxiety, all the anxiety and right
exactly.
Where did you find how did you get access to all the amazing archival footage that you got? I mean, did that come through the connections that you made from the interview subject, or
no? No, not in some cases, but generally there's so many archives. Like when I would talk to people, I would take notes of dates. Like I'd get people to try and remember what, like, people were telling me about when the Black Panthers were poured heroin in the streets in Harlem. So I kind of knew the dates. So then I worked with an archival producer. His name's Ed Duff, and he knows how to navigate these archives, and he knows how to, like, what keywords to give and like how to work with them. Because
so that scene in particular, let's say when they were dumping the drugs in the in a water stream or whatever, maybe some TV station was on the scene filming it for the nightly news or whatever, some local New York station or something, right?
Yeah, like the Black Panthers were really good at doing publicity, with PR. So that was something that there was a lot of press that I don't know how much, but it was an event. So there was like luckily we were able to find that footage. But then the footage where you see the Black Panthers after talking about why they did that, Lumumba Shakur and Dr. Curtis Powell, that footage I don't think had ever been seen before. I think we got it digitalized. So some of the stuff like was never had never even been digitalized. So
right. And then you have the young man who this really struck me. I mean, there's so many things that struck me in this film, but there's the young man who at one point is talking about violence, and he says, well, nobody wants violence, but you know, we are dealing with violence on a daily level, and you know, sometimes it doesn't come in the forms that you're thinking about. He says, you know, when you don't have heat in your house, or what, I forget what else he says, but you know, when you don't have food, or when you don't have good hospital service in your neighborhood, in your community, those are all forms of violence that can do harm to you, right? And that just made me think, you know, that's, you know, that there's so many layers of you know, social justice issues in terms of that radical era when people were sometimes subverting the, you know, sort of what people would call law and order. But when you put it in those terms, you sort of, you know, it seems justifiable in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, like they had to do something. Like there were, there was the Lincoln Hospital that they took over to start the clinic. That was what that one hospital serviced 400,000 people. Like the, and you know, the doctor-patient ratio was like compared to Westchester County or these other white areas. I think it was like 4,500 to 1 as opposed to like 300 to 1. You know.
Yeah.
Something.
Was that actually why they originally occupied Lincoln Hospital? Because to make that statement that like, this is crazy, this place is a zoo all the time because it's so overwhelmed all the time. It's not serving the community. They're trying, but it's not serving the community because it's unfair, right?
Yeah, there was people who were dying of just really medical neglect.
Yeah. And
things that were very preventable, and children were getting lead paint poisoning at the hospital. Like the hospital that was just, people were afraid to go to the hospital. Right. They called it the butcher shop. So it was a really, really dire situation. And there was a program there was like a methadone, one program at the Lincoln Hospital for addiction, and it treated 100 outpatients. But there was like, I don't know how many, but I think 10,000 at least addicts in the South Bronx at that time. Right.
So there's one other specific archival scene that I want to ask you about, because it's, you know, this is a tough subject in a lot of ways and on a lot of layers, but the Revolutionary Puppet Show cracked me up. And, you know, so where'd you find that footage?
I think it was from, again, it was Eddie who
Your
found
researcher,
all this.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's hard to know who exactly shot it because I think we got it from AP, but they buy stuff from other places. Yep. So I'm not sure. We know that it was a piece on the daycares, because the Black Panthers also started daycare programs. Mm-hmm. So it was a piece about, I think it might've been in New Havens. Specifically that piece, that clip.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of thing that as a documentary filmmaker, I'm sure you come across it, or your researcher presents it to you and you go, oh my God, that's a little bit of gold right there for 10 seconds, right?
Yeah. I felt like that with that and the pouring of the heroin. Yeah. I mean, I love originally, you know, when I started the film, I didn't think I was going to use that many archives because archives are very complicated to license, but it became clearer and clearer that I needed to use archives to really bring it, to set the tone of that era. Yeah. To really, and then it just became so important. I mean, in the end, it's like 30%, almost 30% archives. Right. But there was really no way around it.
Well, right. I mean, you needed that to augment the fact that you did get so many incredibly powerful voices on camera in the talking head setting, but you got to have the archival footage too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just so we can really understand, like, you know, the context of what of the South Bronx and so.
Right. Here's a sort of a comment with a question from a viewer. The comment is well worth reading, so I'm going to read it. An absolutely terrific movie, Mia. Congratulations. such great access to archives and sources. And then she asked, how many hours of interviewing did you start editing from?
It was like almost 2 years of kind of editing. I actually didn't do the interviews with each person weren't crazy long because I didn't want to monopolize everybody's time, and probably like an hour each person. But we started with one assembly of like 6 hours, and then just kept cut when I got the first editor in, because I worked with I edited it, but I had 2 different editors come in to help organize, because it was impossible for me to really focus. I needed people to come in and help structure the material.
Did we mention, now I'm so engaged in the conversation, I can't remember. Were we talking about this before we went live, or did you, so the Mutulu, when you first started corresponding, did we talk about this in the live here, or the fact that you had, what you had originally thought of doing?
I
you
think
did talk
I mentioned
about
it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure.
I'm not sure though, but because it was originally supposed to be a film that was like Mutulu reuniting with his former teacher, Mario.
Right. We did. Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would like to ask you for a minute about your previous film, Deprogrammed. Can you just tell viewers, because I think that some people who will watch tonight might be, and I haven't seen it, so as interested as I am in seeing it. Do you want to just sort of explain what it's about and when it came out? And
Sure. It's called Deprogrammed, and it focuses on the controversial deprogramming work of this man named Ted Patrick, who coined this term and invented this process of deprogramming people from cults in 1971 after Manson and Children of God and all this kind of a moral panic surrounding, and particularly after Jonestown in 1978. There was this, families were desperate to get their adult children out of these these groups, because they were terrified that something like Jonestown or Manson was going to happen. So in 1991, my parents hired him to deprogram my stepbrother.
Oh.
So I was like 13. So that's how when I first met Ted Patrick. So the documentary, we learn about his work through different people from different cults. Some people say that Ted saved their life. Their deprogramming saved their life. Other people said it was a violation of their religious freedom and their human rights, and they felt very abused and they have PTSD from it. And so it's a very interesting, it's a very hard issue. It's not a black and white issue. Like some people were in dangerous situations. Some people
were perfectly happy where they were and were safe and were right.
So
wanted to live that lifestyle or whatever it was, right? As long as it wasn't a murderous cult, right? As long as it wasn't a Manson cult.
Yeah, I mean
if it's just a communal living situation and everybody's safe, then that's personal choice, right? So yeah, it isn't a black and white.
It's not, and it's like also, how do we know when somebody? Because the issue is, the people, when you're in a high control, mind control situation, people, can lose their autonomy. And but how do you know?
How do you know? Right.
So this film, that documentary explores that through different cases,
Did you tell the personal story about your family?
A bit, yeah.
In the
So
film?
It starts with that, with my stepbrother's experience, and
it just opens out from there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, but maybe that's the answer. Maybe working on Deprogrammed is the answer. But you obviously have a real fascination for a specific era of the not so distant past, which is basically the 1970s, right? Like the post-hippie era, sort of. With these 2 films in particular, anything in particular that you can point to that makes you sort of attracted multiple times, or is your next film going to be about the present day or the 1800s or something that has nothing to do with the 1970s? Or would you say that you are sort of attracted to that era for what reason?
I definitely am, and I'm not sure what it is. I think just growing up and reading so much about these youth movements, whether they were like political or spiritual and religious. In a way, they're kind of, there's so many similarities. A lot of people who joined some religious cults in the 70s say they had come from radical political groups that were unsuccessful, where they felt that they weren't making a difference, like from the late 60s, early 70s. So there is definitely a connection.
Right.
But I can't really say exactly why. I just find it an inspiring era, but I will probably move on and not, I like my next film will be more contemporary.
Do you know what it is yet, or are you still working on it? Do you
I'm
not
still
want to
working
talk
on
about
it.
it yet? Yeah.
I'm still working on it.
Fair enough. And then we have a question from a viewer, Catherine. Hi, Catherine. How are you? And she wants to know, given the subject and the current life situation of so many people in our society, do you see yourself carrying this subject forward?
I mean, I'm always going. I actually just finished a podcast version. That kind of with some of the interviews that I couldn't, that weren't in the film, and also that goes a bit more deeper into Mutulu's case and the current situation of what it means to be a political prisoner in America. And we're releasing that in a week or two.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it's called Dope is Death. It's also called Dope is Death. And
the podcast, right?
The podcast. But we have a website, dopeisdeath.com.
Yep.
And so that will be coming out. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I really feel driven to continue to speak out about Dr. Mutulu Shakur's legacy and, trying to raise awareness so he can come home. And he's an elder. He has cancer. He's been incarcerated for 34 years. He's absolutely no threat to society. And he's eligible. He meets the criteria for compassionate release for elderly people incarcerated, and they're not releasing him. And so there's and him and others from this era. So I think with Black Lives Matter now, like, I think these are people who really started. There's so many political prisoners from the Black Liberation Movement who are still incarcerated, and I think they need our support right now.
Who's producing your podcast? Is there a big Canadian company that does podcasts, or is it an American?
Well, we did it with the Canadian Media Fund. So it's with funding that we had from the documentary to do a virtual reality, like an interactive project. Yeah. In connection with it, but then I was like, I don't want to do. It doesn't feel right to do like a VR, like an inaccessible kind of VR project for this topic. So we convinced them that we should to do a podcast. And with COVID and coming back from our first festival, we had one festival. We had our premiere at True False, which was just before the lockdown. So then. We it's funded with the Canadian Media Fund, which is like our tax credit program.
How many episodes is the podcast?
There's 4.
Right. Well, I totally look forward to listening to that. There's been so many great similar podcasts that I've really invested a lot of time into over the last few years, and I had no idea that you were doing that. So now I got more Dope is Death to take in and think about. I think we might be about ready to wrap up. I thoroughly appreciate your being here to talk to us, as we have all week with all the filmmakers. But your film in particular, for whatever reason, for many reasons, I think, just given me in particular a lot to chew on and think about, and excited to have people watch it. So, thanks for being here, and we look forward to seeing what you come up with next, and hope to have you in Newburyport. You should mention the Newburyport thing about Deprogrammed. Yeah, so I was able to, one of the participants in Deprogrammed who I interviewed, who had been deprogrammed by Ted Patrick,
Dr. Dan lives in Newburyport, so I went there to interview him.
So that we did
Yeah.
talk about before we were live, and
Yeah.
she said, Dan, he's a doctor. And those of you from the Newburyport area who are watching will know, as I did, oh, that's Dr. Dan. Like everybody knows Dr. Dan, and knows the name, or knows a friend who's had family members go visit him or whatever. So worth mentioning. But anyway, Mia,
great person.
Sorry, go ahead.
He's a really fascinating, amazing man, and I was very lucky that he, trusted me to.
Was willing to talk about it for that film.
It was an intense experience for him. So
yeah, of course, I'm sure it was. Right. Well, thanks again. We look forward to having you. We look forward to seeing what you do next, and hopefully having you here live in person with it. To come, you can come down from Montreal and come up on stage and talk to us rather than do it by Zoom. But in the meantime, this will have to do, and I think it did do. We were really, really happy to have you talk to us about the film. So thanks again.
Thank you so much. Okay, thanks a lot.